bit about myself. My company's Beacon Hill Restoration. I've been doing it for 45 years now. God, and I'm only 42. I don't know how that happened. We work all over the greater Boston area, up on the North Shore, Amesbury. Work down on the Cape, work in Hingham. We've been down at the Mayflower Society House for 2 years now, restoring that. And they've got their talons in us. We've got a 5-year plan, so we'll be working on that. We're also in Back Bay, Beacon Hill, working in those areas. It's a lot of fun. I taught at the North Bennett Street School for about 20 years, the Historic Preservation Program. Helped conceive it with my teaching partner, Robert Adam. That was back in 85 to 2005. I draw all my employees from the school and the program. I'm still an advisor to the program. So it's kind of like shooting fish out of a barrel. It's great. One of my former students took over my place, so I get on the phone, call him up and go, "Who are your rock stars?" And then I'll go in and do a presentation like this, show them what the company's about, and then take them on as interns, a couple of interns between their first and their second year. And if it works out, and it often does, then I end up hiring them full time. So it's nice knowing that this historic preservation and all the hands-on work, which is what the school is all about, is alive and well. I feel very, very fortunate to be able to draw from the school and get my employees, because I know what I'm getting, and they're very focused. So anyhow, that's what I do. And so this is the Amesbury house, the Lowell Bagley house, built in 1784. Possibly between 1770 and 1780. But it has a lot of the early 18th century details in it, and the timber frame is all 18th century. So go ahead, next one. It did have shutters on it. I believe are the shutters still around in the house someplace? Yeah. And this has been taken off, and this is an addition that went in probably 1834. Next. Now, is Mrs. Longear in this picture? I believe she's right there. This is a little bright. I apologize. I couldn't find my red one. So this is a wonderful picture. With her standing out front. Mrs. Longear purchased the house in 1922. Got it. And she purchased all the other properties. There's one in Lynn. There's one in Stoughton. There's one in Concord, New Hampshire, Rumney, New Hampshire, North Groton, New Hampshire. And then the main estate is 400 Beacon Street. They've done a major restoration there, and it's going to be opening up to the public in June. And it really is something magnificent that you should see and see the work that they've done there. It really is something extraordinary. Next. This is Squire Lowell Bagley and his wife, Sarah Osgood Bagley. They got married and then probably finished the house in 1811, and that's about when he put the kitchen addition on, which I'll show you. And then upkeep and further augmentation of the building in 1834. I'll show you what he did with the windows next. His 3 daughters, Emmeline, Mary, and Sarah Bagley. Next. This is Hattie Gunnison. She was the caretaker for the house. And she, when she passed away, the house was up for sale, and then Mrs. Longyear purchased it in 1922. Next. I was finally led to buy several of the houses that were mentioned in Mary Baker Eddy's writings as her homes in her early life, hoping thereby to keep them out of the hands of exploiters and make them distributing centers of knowledge regarding her life, illustrating the ethics of truth, which I think is very telling, and the reason why she wanted to maintain her legacy through the maintenance of the houses that she boarded in. Next. So this is my first visit to the house back in 2018 on a nice snowy day, just to take a look at the outside and talk about possibly putting some storm windows in. That's what I was hired to do and take a look at. Next. So this is the south elevation with the kitchen addition. It was put on in 1811. Next. This is the rear of the house, the west elevation with a shed, an 1835 shed. Next. That's the shed on the left. That's the kitchen addition, the main body. Right here. Next. That's the shed. This is an addition that goes into the kitchen, and this is the north elevation. This is the interior when I visited it. And you can see the original rug. I believe she bought that in 1825. I think for $25, if I'm not mistaken, on the records. It's a tapestry rug. Several layers of wallpaper in here. This is the garden room. So the entrance is through here. You come through this door. Next. This is the parlor, and now the dining room, with its wonderful purple rug in here. Next. This is Mrs. Eddy's room upstairs on the second floor. Next. This is the Bagley chamber, this 18th century overmantel frame and panel with fielded panels. We'll take a better look at that later. Next. This is the kitchen, the 19th century stove. All of this was grained with wallpaper. And then behind here is the cook oven, or the beehive oven. It may have possibly been moved from the garden room, flipped around 180 degrees. We did some studies on it and actually looked at the hearth cribs down below and how they were supported, and sort of looked in plan view to see if we could figure out what the changes were, and also based on what we found looking at the timber frame. Next. This is the bourning room, and now become a sewing room, but they have a bourning room because it was off the kitchen. There was heat. It was private. It was quiet for birthing. This is the pantry right off the kitchen, and which, as it turns out, there's a little 3-foot addition, little appendage that was added onto the kitchen. I'll show you why. Next. Here we go. Okay, so here's Main Street. Here's the deck. You walk in through here into the garden room. There's the sitting room, the kitchen addition, probably 1811. That little pantry I just showed you, the bourning room, and the 1835 shed. This little section right here is actually a separate 3-foot addition to that kitchen. And the reason they did that was once they had the kitchen, they needed to have another door that went into that parlor, so this could be a circular pattern. And we know that is a 3-foot addition that was done later on. When I look at the timber frame, we can see exactly how that timber frame was done, and it shows it was separate. Next. This Mrs. Eddy's chamber, the Bagley chamber, okay, deck coming in here, staircase. This wall was added So this would have been one chamber with a fireplace and a fireplace here. So it would have been 2 chambers, which is typical for a cape like this. And then this is the garret over the kitchen, which is called the trunk room. Next. And then we have the attic up here with the staircase that winds up and a real head bumper as you go up there. If you're on tour and going up there, either duck or wear a hard hat or take your chances. And then you have the basement with the hearth cribs for the 2 chimneys. And the hearth crib was made out of brick. You know, the 2 sides come up. It has an arch, and the arch supports all the way to the chimneys that go right up through the roof. Next. So we started on the south elevation. And when I first looked at the property, you could see signs of paint peeling. You know, all our houses have paint peeling. And a lot of paint peeling up here. And then as we get back onto the rear elevation, you could put your fingers through the clapboards. It'd come down through the downspouts and gone into the corner boards. So we started with this elevation first. Go ahead, next. This is an 18th century timber frame. English, it's an English frame. You get into New York, they're Dutch frames. This is called the scribe rule timber frame. There were 2 methods at this point in time for timber framing. And when they say scribe, they mean that this brace has to be scribed to that post. Everything has to be scribed based on the irregularities of the timber. So if it had waning on it, which is where the bark was removed, they'd have to scribe that piece and put that puzzle together. Later on in the 19th century, you have what's called the square rule. And I actually brought a book with a timber frame that I did, a barn that I did with my students, which is a square rule. And what it's doing is taking an irregular timber and creating a very consistent timber within it, so all the pieces fit. And when we belonged to the Timber Framing Guild, we'd have a conference. We had one in Chicago. We were given a building to build. We got all the prints on the East Coast. They got their part in Chicago, and the West Coast got their piece of the building. It was that square rule method. If you did your homework, all the pieces ended up in Chicago, the building would go up. So there's a real method to the madness. So this is a gun stock post. It comes up like this, shaped like a big gun stock, also called a jowled post. That's an end girt. These are principal rafters, and those are called purlins that tie it together. Those are the floor joists. Those are the braces. This is called an English tie joint. Next. So talk about a puzzle. There's the post. There's the plate. The post has 2 tenons on it, one opposed to each other. That girt comes down. It's dovetailed into place, drops on top of that. And then that's the principal rafter that has a mortise and tenon in it. And that whole thing drops together. And again, this is all what's called scribe rule, so it's really, really, really finicky work. It really, the house wrights and the timber framers were the best in the business. Next. There's a gun stock post. Unadorned. Later on, they would case these and then put a beaded edge on it or put a lamb's tongue detail up there, all hand carved, and they would embellish these things and cover them up. This is an early frame, 1674. Next. This is up in the Bagley chambers. I don't know if you can see that. It's sort of tapered. That one's exposed. So this does have gun stock posts. Next. And you can see the taper here for the gun stock post. Next. Now the fun begins. You can cover your eyes up there. We started stripping the clapboards, and first thing we look at is the foundation and the sills. Next. If you can see this outline here, That's originally where a single window was before they added these two windows flanking it when they redid the windows in 1834. And this is all beveled siding. So the siding will come up and it has a 45-degree bevel. The next one sits on top of it. Instead of butting the joints together so that the wind and the rain and moisture can't migrate into the building. They were very smart back then. They've moved in. These are carpenter ants, and you can see you can see these Roman numerals, what's left of them. Those are called tally marks. They're Roman numerals, and they would be on top of a stack of boards. You know, the board stack might be 3 or 4 feet high, and on the top would be the Roman numerals, and that's the number of board feet that came from the lumber yard. So it told the builder how many board feet, number 1 that he ordered, and number 2 supposedly what was in the pile. Next. So these are the marks right here. And they're done with what's called a timber scribe, which looks like a carving tool, has a point and a little carving tool on the end of it, and it's got a hook like that, and you scribe it, and that's called a timber scribe or a race knife. Next. Apotropaic. These go back to medieval times, and they would do these little compass flower drawings, and they were to ward off evil. And apotropaic means to ward off evil or avert evil. So we found this up on the north, on the sheathing up on the north elevation, which is really nice. And this is done with that timber scribe in a compass. Next. All right, so fun begins. The sill's gone. There's been repairs over the course of time, you know, that supported the building. It was fine. For the most part, kept the moisture out of there. You can see this is the back side of the lathe for the plaster. It's called accordion lathe. And there's 3 types of lathe. The accordion lathe, they would take a board, probably this high. They'd take a hatchet and they'd split the end of it. They'd flip it over 180 degrees. They'd split the end of it. Then they'd pick it up horizontally. They'd nail it into place. They'd pull it down like an accordion, nail it on the bottom. So when you plaster, it would go through these irregular spaces, come through the lathe and hook over, and those are called the keys. When those keys fail and break off, I don't know how many people have old houses here. When they break off, the plaster starts to divorce from the wall. We do have an insane method for maintaining it and restoring it. Next. So termites have been in here, carpenter ants. This is where the service entrance came in. So we redid the service entrance and did it underground and came in through the foundation 4 feet below. Next. Kind of hard to see here, but that's rebar. And it's drilled into the granite, the original granite foundation, and then run across so that we're going to be pouring a wall on top of that, and it locks everything into place so the two are married together. Next. So there's the foundation that's formed on top of those granite blocks. Next. These are the new sills. These are full 8x8, whereas if you buy it from a lumber yard now, an 8x8 is 7 1/4 by 7 1/4. 2x4 is 1.5 by 3.5. This is a full 8x8 because the timber frame was a full 8x8. Next. So had it extended almost out to the road and then driving it into place. There was a foundation in front of it to support the old wall. So we were able to lift up the building just enough to take the pressure off those studs, get it off the sill so we could replace the sill. Next. Here's the sheathing. We purchased the sheathing from a sawmill the Bartlett sawmill in the next town over. There were a lot of sawmills in that area, so it was nice that we were able to purchase from this Bartlett family, which is an old family in the Amesbury area. So we were buying as local as we could. And you can see the bevel on that. And then the ends are in turn beveled, so they lap over and create a weather seal. Next. I don't know if you can see this, but you can see that angle right there under the clapboards. You have it on this house here, and that's called a skived joint. So again, instead of butting the clapboards together, you put a skive joint on it. They lap over. They're a feather edge. They can expand and contract, but as they expand and contract, they never expand and contract over the length so much that they're going to open up. Next. These are some original ones that we found up in the garret. They're 18th century. The exposure was very small. They were probably about 3 inches. They're skive joints. Nothing is over 4 feet. They're typically 4 feet, 2 inches. The 2 inches is the skive joint. And how they made, and we used to do this at the school just as punishment for the students and build character, is they would take a 4-foot log, and then they would take a tool called a froe, had a handle and a 90-degree blade, and they would quarter it like a pie, and then they continue to make these pie-shaped pieces out of a log, right, and then hand plane it. We still teach that. We teach this for doing shingles the same way. So it's very labor intensive. Next. So this is Brian Reed. He was one of the members of the staff that we were training on site. Real workhorse, great guy, good sense of humor. This is called a shave horse. You take the clapboard. These are new clapboards, but we've hand planed them. They're vertical grain fir. Next. And you take a draw knife, which has a very sharp blade on it. Next. And you scribe a 2-inch line across it, and then you shave that to a feather edge. And you do it very carefully while you're sitting down, so that you don't have an accident and become a eunuch. Next. This is Andrew. Andrew works for me. And he's, in fact, I think this was during one of the open houses that we had. And we were doing demonstrations on the next. Same thing, scribing it. Next. We've got the new sheathing on. This is Adrian. He works for me, and he's starting to put the first course on, and we've got galvanized mesh that goes on the bottom because the clapboards are actually floating on the sheathing. Next. So the clapboard sits on top of that so that air can get up through and dry the backside of the clapboard. A house has to breathe, so you have some kind of venting going up through. Next. There's the first run. Next. In the 4-foot pieces, stagger them. Next. And you can see the new skive joints. Next. When we lay these up, we'll put the first one up and use a pinner. It's like little needles that you shoot out of a gun. They're stainless steel pins. You don't see them. That'll hold it in place. Put the next one up, keep going. And then you have to pre-drill. Next. And these are hand-wrought nails, or machine-cut nails that are made down in Wareham from the Tremont Nail Factory. So you have to pre-drill, and then you nail things in. They get sunk in, and then you paint over it. Next. So they're working their way up. And if you can see the curve in the roof. So it actually has a bowed roof. A lot of wives' tales with all these old buildings. That these were salvaged from, the bow of a boat. It's a detail you see on the Cape. In many cases, it was for more headroom when you're up in that garret. You've already banged your head on the way up, saving graces. You get a little more headroom when you get up there. Next. So you can see the bow here. right? And, which is really handsome. And that's, that's original to the building. Next. These are the bowed rake boards that come down. If you notice, they're tapered. Next. You flip these over. So we try to maintain as much of the original fabric of the building as possible. So these are the rake boards, the trim boards that come down, and they taper, and they get bigger as they get down the bottom. So you either see it on bowed buildings, you also see it on straight buildings. And if you've ever been up to Strawberry Bank in Portsmouth, almost all those buildings have these tapered rakes, and it emulates a tree. Tree is bigger at the bottom, and they used everything. Next. East elevation. Next. So removing all the clapboards. Next. This is one of the corner details where the cornice is on the right-hand side. We knew that it had what's called a return, which I'll show you in a couple of slides, and the evidence was there, and it's 18th century, so they just, they had changed that over the course of time. So I was up there on the ladder looking at it, and I gave that board a bit of a rap. Next. Carpenter ants. Active. They're buzzing all over the place. Next. Carpenter ants have a pointed wing. Termites have rounded wings. So next time you're playing with them, you can take a good look and see what you're working with. Next. A little hard to see, but looks like a geranium bed. We pulled this out with our hands. It's one of the beams. It's a girt. It's called an end girt. Next. So I was lucky to get a photograph of it before it fell out. Next. So we'll clean it out, chisel it out until we get to bare wood or clean wood. And you can see one of the studs coming up into this plate and the girt. Next. And then we start filling in the puzzle. Next. Braces, studs. Next. Notching them out, putting them in with stainless. Next. Replacing the plates. And this is actually oak. Next. So we recreated this molding, which is the same, both of the same moldings as some of the moldings on the inside of the house. So these, you can see how the windows cut on the top there into the fascia and into what's called the bed molding. When they changed out the windows from a smaller window to a larger window, they notched into this detail at the soffit and the frieze. Next. That would have been 1834. So good idea here. This is new casing, new band molding, or what's called an architrave molding that comes from the classical orders. Next. There's that return without carpenter ants. So that would have come there, and that's called a water table, so the water sheds off the top of that. And then we put lead-coated, lead on top of that and tucked up underneath. Next. So this detail is all completed. Next. This is the rear elevation or the west elevation. There's that 3-foot addition. And there's the shed. Next. There's the 3-foot addition right there. We're looking right here into the pantry. Next. Again, had to do some work on that upper plate. Next. You can see where powder post beetle has gone in there. Fortunately, I think they just gave up. They didn't go in that far, so we treated it. It was okay. Next. You can see some of the damage it did on some of the other ones. Once they get tunneling, they really can do damage. Next. That's a powder post beetle. And if ugly's painful, they're in trouble. But you can see, I mean, they get right in there. They're really excavators. Next. You know, they've dug into here. You can see the dust. And they were actually active on the front elevation. And we had to have somebody come in and take care of it. Next. So adding pieces onto a broken tenon on the end of a girt, next. And that all has to be cut into place. Making repairs to the top plate. And this is all sort of temporary as we're working our way up. That'll all get new sheathing next. So there's the addition right there, next. And we can tell by the timber frame, that's 3 feet. We can tell that it's different from the original kitchen addition in 1811. And this, this joint and then heads down this way. And the studs are different than the earlier 18th century. Next. Put on new sheathing, insulated everything, used rock wool, which is a fireproof. And for a timber frame, it's really easy because you can just cut out the pieces, stuff them in there. It's like cutting a puzzle. Most of the original sheathing was in good shape. Next. All right, so all this had to be replaced. This had plywood on it earlier, and we wanted to re-insulate everything. So while we had that timber frame open, we had the luxury of insulating everything. So it's all that new beveled siding. Next. And putting up the clapboards in that area. Next. Working our way up the back side on the west elevation. You can see those cleats that run up vertically so that air can circulate in back of the clapboards. Next. This is Gray Carlson. He was also a staff member. And he's back in California now, is that correct? Yeah, that's too bad. He was great. A lot of fun, great worker, very smart. And he came to the Long-Ear Foundation as a builder, a very good builder, very good home builder. So this is the shed. We're looking at the foundation, and again, of course, there's issues. Next. So we stripped everything, snuck in a new foundation under there, repaired the corner posts and the studs. Next. On the right-hand side, on the west elevation, as we were digging and getting ready to get down below the foundation and also do the drainage, we found a cistern, which is pretty common for the 19th century. So they were thinking green back then. Collect the water off the roof, come down a downspout, collect it in the cistern. Next. Here's a drawing of it. Next. We're parging this with a plaster. It's a cement plaster and trained with fiberglass, so it locks everything into place. So he's sitting on top of the cistern. Excuse me. And above, there's that window. Next. This is in the shed. There was a sink there and then the hand pump. So they're utilizing the water that came from the cistern. Next. We did a 2-part drainage system. This would catch all the groundwater next to the foundation. Next. Ran across, and it'll pick up downspouts here. Next. And then a separate system just below the finished grade, going to dump into these boxes and get rid of the water that came off the roof. Next. All the way around. And then this would exit. Now, how handy. We have a dry well over here. How fortuitous. Maybe I'll stand over here so I'm not in your way. Next. So they're putting new sheathing on the shed. Next. That's all new clapboards. Next. So the new foundation, replace the brick that was there, and then put in this bottom piece. We use PVC there. We're not against using PVC, which is reversible, but it's also sacrificial. It really holds to the weather, and it's going to get buried by that step there. Next. So this is the cast of characters, the motley crew that actually worked on this place. You got a carpenter, you got somebody that's obviously a member of the Shriners with a fez on. Got an Irish cap here, and farmer in the dell, I suppose. Next. So we work hard and we play hard and we have an awful lot of fun. So that's me. This is Rex Nellis, and Rex is joining us here in the rear. This is Brian, and that's Greg Carlson. Next. So these are the original characters. So we're not just the guilty ones. Here's our Shriner. Next. So there's Gray. Gray's now been dubbed a Shriner. We left the old guy in there. That's Brian, and that's Adrian, who works for me. Next. This is Edward Coutemanche. Yeah, he was called the French plumber, and he did all the work for Mrs. Longyear, rather portly fella. Next. Nice smile on his face, a bow tie. Next. And our version, next. That's Andrew, who works for me, and he's playing the part of the French plumber. Nice little pot. We found this upstairs in the bathroom off the chamber, and he signed it. And did we ever find out who Higgins was? Was he the electrician that did the work? Huh. Partner in crime, 1923. Next. Next. North elevation, right here. Next. So there was always a question where the original door was. And that's why we looked at all the plan views. We looked at where the chimneys were, the stacks, the hearth cribs. Next. But once we opened this timber frame up on this girt, we could see the pockets for the mortise and tenon, for the door jamb, and one over here, and we found it evidence down below. Next. So that's the entrance now. Most likely that was the entrance to the house, which makes sense. Next. So it would have come through where this window is, right, and gone right to what would have been the staircase, because the staircase is now around the corner. It's been oriented 90 degrees, which would have gone up the second floor. Next. So if you look in plan view, you come in, and then you head up the stairs. Next. Right up into the second floor. Next. This is a door that was there, and it's probably late 19th century, early 20th century. So we recreated this one, because this one had been cut down or recycled. You can see that it doesn't have a bottom rail or much of a bottom rail. It probably would have come down to about here, typically 9-10 inches. Next. So we drew up the new door. Next. And that's the new door installed, and we're doing all the paint work. And we've got Norfolk hardware from England. Next. So I found a matching set from one of my pickers down in Connecticut. It bolts through the doors, and those are square nuts are on the back side. Next. This is the interior. Next. So you can see where the two bolts come through there, and then you got the keeper and the latch. Next. This is the shed door that we restored, and then next. So I found identical latches, which was nice, and it was nice that they were brass so that we could use them as exterior doors. Next. Norfolk latch on the inside. Next. Cast back plates, Norfolk latches. These are original to the house. Next. So there's the latch that I found. And then it has cast iron hinges in there, which are 19th century, and these are lift-off hinges instead of having pins driven through them. Those are 19th century. A lot of them were missing, so I located those. We stripped them down, took the paint off, and put them in. Next. You get a side view. Next. And you can see the bolt. And those are hand threaded. These are from England. Anything would have come over to England, from England, until the first patented Norfolk latch, which is 1849, which was called a Blake's pattern latch, and we know it because it's dated. So this would have all been English. Next. This is that north wall. That's where the door was. This girt had to be replaced. This is up above the door in a little crawl space where Adrian's either having lunch or working. Next. This is looking out. You can see that this is destroyed. So we're going to slip a new piece in. Next. There's the new oak piece that goes through. You can see the split lathe. It's not accordion lathe. They'd actually split pieces off a board. And then later you would see sawn lathe. Next. So there's the beam running through. And you can see the new insulation. Next. That's all the rock wool that's been cut into place. So we were able to re-insulate the entire building, which was nice. Next. These are called marriage marks. So this is a scribe rule frame. This brace has to go here, and then it has Roman numerals. Those are called tree nails or trunnels. So you have the mortise and tenon. You have the hole that goes through the mortise, and then you slip the tenon in, and then you have these two offset holes. And then when you drive the pin in, it lines the holes up and it sucks the joint together. Next. So in north face, doing the bevel edge siding. Next. Tally marks on that end. Next. Working our way up. This has original sheathing, early 19th century sheathing. No, actually, this is late 18th. This is 19th, 1835, and both of these are skive joints, too. Next. Gray staring at this going, really, God, do I have to side that? He pulled all those clapboards off, and he stripped all the paint off, cleaned them up, repaired them. Next. There they are, because they're original. And again, we want to save as much of the original fabric on this building as possible, or any building that we're working on. Next. So he's cleaning these guys up. Next. They're all clean. Next. Contemplating. But he's taking his time putting these back up. He did a great job on it. He's a terrific carpenter. Next. So that's all done, and it's all vented too. And then we filled in some of these guys. Next. Working our way up the rakes, you can see the bow. Next. You can really see it here. It's subtle, but it's, you catch it at the right angle. It seems to be very pronounced. Next. Almost done. Next. So a lot of original sash to the building. In all the buildings that we work on, we want to save the original sash and then put storm windows on it to protect them. Various states of disrepair. You can see the blistering on the paint. Next. So there's where that window was. Next. So we strip the sills down to bare wood and then rake out any decay, and it wasn't really deep. Next. We would add on pieces and add on to the horns if we had to. You can see that this is raked out. Next. And sometimes we'll use epoxies, and this type of epoxy is very flexible. So you can It comes in a double caulking gun. You squeeze it out, you mix it up, and it's the consistency of peanut butter, so you can take a wad of it and throw it on the wall. It'll stick, and it won't sag, whereas if you use other epoxies, like boat building epoxies, they drip down. So and then you can plane it like wood. Next. Done. We use oil-based primers, and then we use acrylic, 100% acrylic paints. Next. The jambs have pieces that are missing, so it's like timber framing where you're cutting that notch out. Next. The idea is to get as much long grain glue surface as possible when you're making these repairs, either in a timber frame or anything, frankly. Next. New casing with a beaded edge, which matches the original because we had signs of it. Next. And this was actually at the open house, so that when people were at the open house, because this was closed up, we'd had pictures of the timber frame and the insulating that we did so they could see what was done behind the scenes. This has the new molding on it. Next. So with the sash, you have to pull everything apart, and then you have to rebuild some of these joints. Next. Here's the mortise and tenon. It's got 3 pins in it, and it's the same process as you're doing a timber frame. When you put them together, it's called draw boring. Where you put it in, you get 2 offset holes, you drive the pin in, sucks it in. There's no glue. Next. Gray's putting these back together. All of this was during the pandemic, so everybody's got masks on. I mean, we wear masks anyways, and then fully suited up if we're stripping things down, working with lead paint. We're registered with the state and the EPA. Next. This is Loria. Once the frames are back together, she can start painting them. Next. We catalog all the glass, and it's documented, so if it's original glass, we want to go back in its proper location. And most of the glass was 19th century glass, early 19th century glass. 2 ways of making glass in the 18th century and 19th century. The first method is called table glass, and they would take a blowpipe, take a hot wad of glass, put it on the end of the blowpipe, and the blowpipe would spin. And as it's spinning, it's like spinning a pizza, 52 inches. And then they'd cut the panes out of it, or they'd cut quarrels, which are diamond, like the like casement windows that you would see in the Paul Revere house or any really early house. And then in the center, they'd break off the center. That's the bullseye, which you'd see up side lights or a transom or some other decorative element. So there was a lot of good 19th century glass. And what we didn't have, we all collect glass. In fact, you had some glass over at 400 Beacon Street from storm windows. And if it had great glass, we'd take the frames apart, cut the glass, and recycle it. Next. So now she's glazing, very painstaking work. And it's oil glazing. And so it takes about 2 weeks to skin over before you can paint it. And you can see that all the glass is labeled to go back where it was. Next. Next. Before the glass goes in, we have to pre-fit them into the openings. You hold them up there because the windows, parallelograms, trapeziums, anything but a true rectangle. Next. Next. So you clamp them into place temporarily, adjust them because you want those meeting rails to line up exactly. Next. Lined up from the outside. Next. Next. And so the glass is back in place. Next. And this is originally what I came to do in the first place. is to put some storm windows in. So there's Andrew putting in the hardware, the mount, and they nest inside the edge of the casing instead of on top of it, like triple track storm windows that most modern houses have. Next. And you can see the color matches exact. And a paint analysis was done to determine what the actual colors on the building were. Next. Yeah, the chimneys. So we had to build staging to get up to the chimneys. Right here, when we opened up that wall, next, there's the original backside of that chimney in the parlor, next. And it had clay mortar. It wasn't lime mortar. And they often use clay mortar if they had clay in the area. The lime, they certainly had plenty of lime because they would grind down seashells, and that's what they'd use in lime mortars. Next. We didn't want it to deteriorate anymore, so we parged it or plastered it. Next. So Graham Pendlebury from New Hampshire was one of the masons that we used up in New Hampshire at the other properties. Next. So to inspect the chimneys, we did it with a drone. They look nice and straight here from this elevation. Next. They look somewhat straight from here. This chimney is inactive, so it gets capped off. Next. When the drone flies, it's self-leveling. This old girl's heading east. So if you picture a straight line, that's how far out of whack it was. And it has to do with the number of times it's been repointed, which way the wind is driving moisture and sand into it. Not uncommon. Next. There's a good, yeah, that and plum have nothing in common. Next. Where the mortar joints are blown out. Next. Right here. They don't have far to fall. Next. So there's the staging. In order to put that staging up and support all the bricks that are going to be up there, which is a fair amount of weight, everything had to be supported from the attic to the second floor to the first floor, right down to the basement, so that it could take that point load, because it's an incredible amount of weight. And they're big boys doing it, and they all weigh, 200-300 pounds. No. Next. So this chimney is going to be inactive. It's the chimney on the left as you're looking at the rear. Had 3 flues, they're not going to be used. So you take the chimney down to the roof line, next, and then build up from the roof line, right? And you got this sort of ladder effect here. Excuse me. And then it would get a through flashing. And then you can see these bronze rods that come up through. So when they continue building up, those bronze rods would go up through that next couple of layers. Didn't want that chimney to come sliding down off the roof. So it has to be anchored incredibly well. Next. There's the new chimney. Identical. Everything was documented in terms of the number of courses, how much they kicked out. And even though it's blocked off, it does have to have venting and air movement, because you don't fill it in all the way. So from the roof line up has those cavities, but it also has weep holes coming out of the mortar joints, so air can circulate. Because what often happens is a chimney will deteriorate from the inside out, where it blows the joints out. Next. And these are all lead-coated copper. Cute little condos for squirrels. Next. So this is the other chimney on the south elevation coming up through. And this is being used for the heating system. Next. And they're working their way up. So they got that one cavity coming up. And they got 2 other cavities. Again, those are that's the vent for the heating system. The other cavities will have caps on it so the air can circulate. Next. And then doing the caps on here. Lead-coated copper. Next. You can see the copper that heats up with it's gas-fired. That lead is at 50-50 lead and tin. Next. And so there's the main stack. You have the grids to keep the squirrels out, and then the 2 vent pockets. Next. It did need a roof. The roof, it lasted, but now it's a terrarium. Next. A bit of a science project. Next. A little bit of plant life in here. Next. So this is the east elevation in the front. Next. You can see the corner detail. Next. So we put plywood over it. It had all the original sheathing boards on the interior, and we wanted to make sure there was absolutely no risk of moisture or water coming through. So it gets plywood on it. Next. And Gray is putting in, next, these bronze rods that come down and are bent. Next. And those are for the gutters. And they support the whole gutter system. This is actually over the kitchen addition, with the skip sheathing and the wood shingles, which were in, very good shape. It was done not too long ago. So we reused the shingles and put them back up. We just wanted to get the gutters in and the venting. Next. This is ice and water shield. It's called Blue Skin. We couldn't take any chances of the rain sneaking in, and we weren't about to put blue tarps up, having them flop in the wind, because if moisture ever got in, it would destroy the plaster, the inside. It really couldn't take any chances whatsoever. Because typically you only have to go up 3 feet for the ice and water. We gift wrap the whole thing. Next. And then you have this mesh, which is called cedar breather. Again, the shingles go on top of that. Air can sneak up through the bottom and then exit out the top. Next. So you can see the shingles going on there. Next. And they're called taper sawn shingles. They're sawn, and the butts of them are 5/8 thick as opposed to 3/8. Next. And you can't see it, but up in here there's a copper strip that helps when the acid rain hits it. It'll prevent moss and lichen growing on it. Next. This is the back. You can see the flashing on the new chimneys, the step flashing or the counter flashing. Next. That's the ice and water. And you can see the gutter brackets. Next. Work in any weather. And wood? Say that again? Is that wood? Yes, those are the same type of shingles. Yep. And then you got the lead-coated flashing. Next. This is the top of the ridge cap. And you can see the mesh. So you put a board ridge on it, and then the neck will get covered with copper. Next. So they're laying out the copper. Next. And it goes all the way across the ridge. That's deceptive. It is straight. We didn't build it like it was. Next. And so you can see the new chimneys, the new roof. Next. So we want to maintain the original horsehair plaster. So we have this method of adhering it back to the lath. You drill a hole and you squirt watered down white glue, Elmer's, PVA, tight bond. Next. And then you take Pheno Seal, which is a water-based caulking, like squirting in a cake topping, pop that in there. The two bond together. You can see all these little pieces. We managed to save all this. And then you just take a screw and a 1 by 1 inch plywood washer, hold it on there, take them off the next day, fill in the holes. Next. And you can see the accordion lath. Next. The stuff popping out. Next. Okay, now that's split lath. They're separate pieces, but just split. You can see it follows the grain of the board. You do a scratch coat on it first. Next. Put that first base coat on, then you scratch it, rake it out, so that when the finish coat goes on, it has something to bite into. Next. We make up our own lime and horsehair plaster. Next. Oh, actually, I forgot this was a video. This is Adrian, who works with me.
So all the plaster in the house that we're doing all our plastering with is all lime and sand. 1 part lime, 3 parts sand. And you've heard of horsehair plaster. Typically it was cattle hair. So we have cattle hair. And what we do is, it's known as teasing in the hair.
We know a good time.
Mix up all of the lime, it's known as lime putty, in our 5-gallon buckets and let it sit. And then we add the sand to it. So we mix up the plaster that's this lime and sand, 1 part lime, 3 parts sand. And we don't add the hair yet until we're actually using it, because the lime will actually eat the hair while it's sitting. Because lime, there's 2 kinds of plasters. There's a chemical cure and then there's a carbon cure. Lime and sand is a carbon cure, so it cures through exposure to air, where Portland cement is cured through an actual chemical. So we don't mix in all the hair all at once. We only mix it in as we're using it. And as you see there, you can see all the strands of hair coming through. A lot of times, we have a square edge trowel, and then we have what's known as a pool trowel. And usually with the pool trowel, historic work is great because nothing is square, level, or flat. The ceilings tend to have a roll to them. You've probably noticed what's known as grinning, where you can see the lath almost transparent through the plaster itself. So a pool trowel is great, so you don't leave ridges as you're applying it. You didn't see either. We actually apply water to the lath before we it's less noticeable.
You can go to the next one. We're good. You can see the horsehair plaster sneaking in there. Next. So you just go through and pull out the old plaster that's too small to re-adhere. Next. Fill it in. Next. So we've done all the plastering. We're starting to strip everything. And then down on the bottom, we had to make up a new baseboard. They were wide boards, single pieces, and then hand planed, and then a beaded edge profile on the edge. Next. You can see the new baseboard. Adrian made it up on site. Next. Next. You can see the sort of burn marks. We use an infrared heater, sometimes heat guns, and chemicals a little bit, but most of it we can do with heat. Next. So you can see sort of the burn marks, but actually it's just the burn marks from the lead charring. They wear hazmat suits, full respirators, and it's vented. Next. Coming together. Because before he stripped it, all the details were filled in with paint, and this really brought it back. Next. And this is the color that it ended up getting painted. And you can see how those details, and this is a real federal fireplace with these dainty little moldings. Whereas in the Georgian period, Georgian houses, 1720 until the Revolution. And then we have a new republic, and in turn, a new architecture. So everything was attenuated, get rid of all that heavy, gaudy, Georgian, Hanoverian architecture. Next. So this is just after it's stripped, a little crusty, but next. Comes together once you sand it down. Next. 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 That's looking real good. Next. Next. So this was a cupboard that had the upper panels taken out, cut like a Dutch door. Next. And we found these vintage turn button latches that were actually in the kitchen also. Next. So here's where we'd use some chemical, really, really light. It just happens to be very shiny. Next. Throw sawdust on it, and then take a plastic brush and rub it so it doesn't destroy the molding details. And then just brush it off into a bag. It absorbs the chemicals. And then you tape it all up and dispose of it properly. Next. Touch sand it. Next. Prime it. And, these are wonderful. People call them raised panels. They're actually called fielded panels. Where the panel is flat, then it comes down at an angle. That's actually called a fielded panel. Next. And for to replace the hinges, some of them were missing, some of them were newer hinges. We're filling in with a Dutchman. Any wooden patch is called a Dutchman. This is Charlotte. She works for me. Next. You can see it's a little hard with the lights on here, but that's a patch that's in there. Next. And there's the cast iron hinge that's going to get cut back into that mortise. Next. Removing paint and calcimine from the ceiling. What are you guys doing this weekend? Come on over. I'll pay for the beer. Calcimine. Anybody have calcimine ceilings? Ever deal with that on walls? Yeah, it's a real pain because paint doesn't stick to it. And if you don't understand what calcimine is and you try painting it, come back a week later, and peel the paint off with your hands. It's pretty discouraging. So you got to strip the ceiling. And then after it's stripped, you got to get up there with TSP and you got to scrub the heck out of it to pull it all out. And you use a dark sponge. And then when you don't see any chalk on the dark sponge, Usually takes a minimum of 3 scrubbings. It may take 5 or 6. So you got somebody that's been irritating you for a couple of years? Put them on that. I love Adrian, but he was on site, so he still doesn't like me. So you have to use chemical on this. Next. So it's taking the paint off. Next. And it's really neck breaking and back breaking. Next. Kind of artwork though, you know, as it's bubbling up. Next. So we use this instead of methylene chloride, which is pretty nasty. This stuff isn't. Next. And then you use what's called cal coater. Once you've got it's scrubbed down with TSP, you use this paint that will adhere to this bare surface, and if there's any residue left in there, the cal coater will lock right into place, and then you can go on top of that with your ceiling paint. Wallpaper time. So we're going to reproduce all the wallpapers, but we've got to strip them off. We just use water. We don't use any chemicals. You just squirt it, and pick the stage in which it's going to come off. Take it off very carefully. So we're taking samples. Next. Actually, go back one slide. This paper, next, goes on top of this paper. So we had to carefully get that first layer off because this is the paper we're going to end up going with. Next. So this is the this is the sample. Waterhouse Wallpapers did it. Here's the original. Next. And this is actually the finished room with its new wallpaper. Next. Which is really handsome. Next. My buddy Rex peeling away wallpaper, cutting out a little window here. This is in the kitchen. Next. And this came off fairly easily, which was nice. It was just one layer. Next. And then the idea was to brighten up this room a little bit and also have a wallpaper that would be a nice segue into the parlor and also into the hallway, into the foyer. So this was chosen. Next. So the kitchen originally was grained, but the cost of regraining it was just going to be absolutely cost prohibitive on this round. So it got painted out. Next. So there's the wallpaper. Really nice. I mean, really, really handsome. Next. This is Pam. She used to work with long hair and unfortunately is no longer with us. She's working in the boarding room, which then became the sewing room once we renovated it. Next. So she's got a slice out here. Next. And she actually worked on picking all these wallpapers out. So we wanted to brighten this room up too and pick a pattern that was appropriate to the period of the house and brighten things up. Next. And we've got this wonderful period sewing machine. Next. This is the Bagley room, Bagley chamber. Next. Actually, that's all right. This is, this will be later. Next slide. This is the cupboard that's in the parlor. And once we took the boards off the back of it, we could see the remnants of the wallpaper. Next. Not much left, however, enough to do the research to figure out what that wallpaper would have been. It's actually called a rainbow paper because you can see the gold here slowly shifts over to this blue and then back over to gold and then repeats itself. Next. So here's some of the original. Here's one of the samples. Next. 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 So it's hard to tell with this light in here. This one, the blue is lighter than the blue in this one. And so we're actually playing around with the shades so that we could picture the whole room. Next. And that's the cupboard, so we left, there's the paper, the new paper. Here's the cupboard, so it's a window of history there with, now that's sawn lathe done on a table saw. Next. But you can see that repeat pattern, which is really wonderful. I mean, it really sets this room off. And then the floors were painted instead of natural. They would have been painted. There might have been an oilcloth underneath there. Next. Next. This is the foyer. You know, as you're coming in the front door here. And again, wanted to brighten it up a little bit and pick out another pattern that would have been appropriate, a little earlier pattern. Next. So there's the pattern. The back side of the new door with its hinges. Next. And a close-up of the hinges. I mean, the lock set, excuse me. That square nut going through. Next. I found these wonderful gas lights and then converted them to electric and left the chains on them that would have been there for the wicks and everything. Next. This is Mrs. Eddy's room. Again, a couple layers of paper. Next. And so this is that board wall that was put up. And then they had canvas to seal the joints and paint over. There's the original wallpaper. Next. And so we went with that. And again, painted the floors. Next. And this is the Bagley chamber. Next. That's the print that was on there. Next. We wanted to lighten things up. You know, and still pick up that flower motif. Next. And there we have it. You got the gunstock post over there in the corner. And all this furniture, that was Bagley furniture, wasn't it? You know, the wonderful cottage pattern furniture. Next. So there's that wall that was added. And this is the fireplace that would have been for that chamber. And then the next. That's the wallpaper that we chose. Next. And this Mrs. Eddy's room, and then coming out into that chamber. Next. Wonderful picture. Next. There you have it. That's it.